All right. Yo. What's going on, everybody? It's the Black Manga Critic here. We are live. With probably the third and maybe last part of, excuse me, a little stuffy, um, of the not of ramblings generally, but just like the doing your work sort of segment of ramblings. Although I think future sort of streams will, sort of more closely kind of revolve around these kinds of discussions that I've been doing more recently, at least like on here, like I don't know how to maybe like there'll be more like sort of like discussions of like texts and ideas and stuff like that. I think for my ramblings, just kind of get like thoughts out there, um, you know, so that's kind of the goal with that. I think in the future it'll be more focused in a topical sort of way, but still be like rambling esque. Just like me kind of like shooting like talking, and throwing ideas out there and thoughts and all that. Tails, how are you? Uh, so that's kind of like the ideas that I have, and I think this third one today. So before I kind of get into like stuff that I just want to talk about, uh, I probably will get back to streaming like manga. I know there's a webinar that I'm gonna be watching at 4. I'm gonna be part of it 4. Then there's going to be another one tomorrow at 2, and one on Monday. So I just kind of have to like keep that in mind in terms of my schedule and like what I'm gonna be viewing and all that, and also just like all the other stuff that I'm doing, like just like a ton of reading, like a ton, you know, which is kind of like always been the case in a certain way, but like I think, it's much more focused now. Like I've always kind of read certain like these types of texts, but I think now it's a lot more focused where I'm like, okay, like these are the texts that I want to read at the moment to get a really good um, idea of certain things moving forward and stuff like that. Anyways, I don't know. I guess I just kind of wanted to sort of like talk about uh yeah, just like thoughts on certain things that I've been seeing again, and texts that I'm reading, uh folks that I've been like looking into, who are just like really really smart and have been doing a lot of work, like not just in the past 2 weeks, but like for like a long time. And yeah, I would say, all right. So I think the thing for me, maybe to start off with, is just like, thinking about like reading. What are you reading? Why are you reading it? Uh, what is the point? You know what I mean? I think those are questions that I ask myself a lot. In terms of, like if I pick up a book, why am I picking that up? What am I trying to get? What am I trying to sort of like take from it? Or, well, not what am I trying to take from it, but what do I hope to take from it, right? Because if I pick up a book, I don't know the contents necessarily, right? I might have read like a little bit in terms of like if there's like a blurb or something like that, you know what I mean? So, like I think that's like a big thing for me right now is, what am I reading? Why am I reading it? I think it's a big reason why I haven't really like read manga like recently. Like I haven't touched like a manga. Not like, outside of like One Piece and like the Fishman Island arc, because like I'm going through that at the moment and working on that for a video that I'm going to be doing. I'm contemplating whether I'm going to put that up on Patreon or just YouTube straight up. I'm not sure. I have a feeling it'll probably I'll probably put it on Patreon, but it won't be for as long as normally. Normally I like wait 2 weeks, but it'll probably be like, a few days, something like that, like 2 or 3 days before like I put it out on YouTube. For this one in particular. But again, back to sort of like these sort of ideas of reading and why we're reading what we're reading. What do we hope to get from the text that we're reading? I think a lot about, when I'm sort of in a book, it's like, okay, this is cool. Like, am I learning? That's a big thing. Like, if I'm reading something and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm like, what am I supposed to take? Like, and I don't know what I'm supposed to take from it, or I feel like the language is so convoluted that I'm not really sure what's going on. Then I have to sort of ask myself, okay, is it worth it to continue going through this text? If I'm not really sort of like understanding what's being said here, or this, that, and the third. I think sometimes if I'm reading a particular text and I know like I'm not getting it, I just got to put it down and be like, all right, and think about, why am I not getting it? Is it just because it's written terribly? Is it just like, is the jargon difficult to sort of like work through? Those sorts of things. And I think if I guess when it comes to language, it's like, if a language isn't for you, yeah, put it down. Maybe come back to it at a different time, and then you move on to something else, and you see if you can find something else that you feel like is more accessible in that way. If it's sort of like the jargon, I think, a lot of times what happens with me is, that happened with me. I was reading, this is like years ago. This is like maybe like 4 years ago. I want to say 4, maybe. Yeah, 4 years ago, I was reading Sarah Ahmed. Like, I was like really, really into affect theory. I wouldn't say that I'm not into affect theory anymore, but I would say that I found like that it's not like the end all sort of be all for me. Like, that was a big thing that I was going into, like when I was still doing the PhD thing. Like, affect theory was a big part of sort of my research and what I was looking into and how I sort of looked into stuff. But I think it was more so about like what Sarah Ahmed, like what she was talking about, and talking like in terms of like queer theory and like queer phenomenologies, and and when I first was sort of introduced to that, like, I think my initial reaction was, and like sort of like Lauren Berlant and Cruel Optimism, those sorts of texts. When I was first introduced to that, it was like, what is going? Like, I was so confused. Like, legit. Like, I didn't get it, and I think a big reason for that is when I sort of tried to read that stuff early on, is because I wasn't really thinking about what was the sort of point of it, so much as I was like, okay, I got to read these things because all these other scholars are reading them and they're really important and they're really in right now. When like affect theory was like huge at a particular moment within academia. So you had all these like affect scholars moving around, talking, and not just like affect theory, like whoa, affect theory, but like you had other scholars like who were also sort of like clearly engaged in affect theory, but it wasn't really, they weren't called affect theorists like Eve Sedgwick and the like, so like, yeah. So I was really in that, but I didn't know what I was looking at. And it took me, and I had to sort of like step away from it and be like, okay, what is it that I'm not getting? And I think that's stuff that I take with me whenever I'm reading anything now. I'm like, why is it that this is difficult to read? Some part of it might be, right, like the language is just kind of like odd, and you have to like really figure out what's going on with these sentence structures and why they are structured that way, and why certain ideas are sequenced in a particular way. But I think with that, it was largely like the jargon and like the terminology, and I just wasn't familiar enough with it. And so I had to kind of be like, all right, let me like find like an affect theory for like folks who weren't really like into that or introduced that in a certain way. Like I didn't have like an affect theory seminar. So I kind of had to like figure that out when talking with different people and people who were already doing that stuff, like other like doctoral candidates and students and stuff like that who were really in that and did that during their undergrad. So that was a lot. But once I got that, and once I sort of felt like I had a kind of foundation, then I could go back to the Ahmed, and I could go back to the Berlant, and I could go back to all these other texts and the Masumi and like all these other texts, and really have a much better sort of sense of what it was that I was looking at. And then it was like, oh, okay, then it made a lot of sense. And then I sort of started to realize that, like, you know, um, affect was really important in terms of like me thinking about certain things. But that wasn't the only time that that happened, right? Like there are always other things that you're going to be reading that are confusing initially, or might be maybe confusing initially, and you have to really sort of like be honest with yourself and be like, I don't know what's going on here, as opposed to like, I think I know what's going on here, so I'm going to keep going and maybe get like 30% of what I should be getting from this thing that I'm reading. So that's something that I do a lot. Like I'm like, okay, am I really getting am I really getting what I should get? Not, I just stop. And I would say that I think that happens far less frequently now than it did like 5 years ago. You know, or even like 7 years ago. Like 7 years ago, it happened like pretty frequently. 5 years ago, it happened frequently, but not as frequently as like, right, like the like 7 years ago. And then within those 5 years, I just got a really sort of strong foundation in terms of like how to read text and how to look through them and critical text and stuff like that, and really know that I understand what it is that I'm looking at. You know what I mean? So like if you like, so one text that I'm reading right now is like let me see. You know, so one text that I'm reading sort of right now is like looking into this text, Neoliberalism by Julie Wilson. And it's sort of like a intro kind of to neoliberalism, like kind of text, I think. That's the best way to describe it, because I feel like there was another book on neoliberalism that I was reading, which was good, but it was very clear that it was like, this is an individual who is by I can't remember his name, Thomas Biebrich or Biebricher, I can't. But basically, like his sort of like discussion of neoliberalism was coming from like someone who was very invested in political theory, and so yeah, I could get through it, but it took me a lot longer to get through that text than it did than this one is. Then it's taking me to get through this one, right? Because this one is sort of like supposed to be like, okay, like Wilson has sort of like undergraduate students in mind, you know, certain, you know, maybe graduate students who are just kind of coming into that and really sort of focusing on that in mind. But I think mainly sort of like undergraduate students who are invested in looking into, you know, neoliberalism and cultural studies and other things. So it's like, this is the text that I think is good. It's a good sort of like way to just kind of get into it. And I think, whereas sort of the other text that I was reading is really sort of historically kind of heavy in terms of, and as it should be, right? Because its audience is composed of individuals who are already sort of somewhat informed in terms of like neoliberalism as a sort of like capitalist project, right? And that's the stuff that's sort of going on there, right? Like, and I get that. So, you know, sometimes you got to find, sometimes it's not just like, okay, do I get what's going on? Sometimes you got to find a better text, like a text that's better for what you need at a particular moment in time. Like for me, the text was fine because I had like sort of like ideas already of like what neoliberalism was, discussions of that, like when I was still doing a grad school thing and all that. And, you know, so it wasn't like super difficult, but it took me a lot longer because there were certain things that I just wasn't aware of, like historical movements and not even ideas, but like instances in which sort of like neoliberalism was sort of birthed in a sense. And I think what I took from that text was like there were so many different ways of sort of viewing neoliberalism, and this text as well, but I think like that text even more so. You know, whereas this text is sort of meant to kind of give you like again a good sort of a decent like foundation, so that when you move into another text, you're not like completely lost. You know, so for me, it's like, again, it's like the stuff that I'm reading is like, okay, what's going on? What am I reading? Why is it helpful for me? So for me, it was like, it's important to sort of like read sort of like about, like to read about neoliberalism, blah, I hate saying that word. And I hate that word. Like it sucks. It's like a sucky thing. But, you know, it's important for me to do that because, again, I'm thinking about, okay, if I'm invested in sort of like an abolition politic, it's like, what am I trying to abolish, right? And neoliberalism is one thing that you're trying to, like, you're trying to get it out of here. You're trying to get neoliberalism all the way up out of here. So you probably should maybe read up on what neoliberalism is and have a decent idea of how it sort of formed in different points throughout history, and why it's so sinister and dangerous and intrinsically contradictory. Like, those are the types of things that I'm really invested in now, because it's like, I gotta know what I'm looking at. If I don't know what I'm looking at, then what happens is you start to talk with other folks who are like, yay, neoliberalism, yay, even like liberalism, right? Like, or, like, it's just like, yay, capitalism. And so you have to kind of be not necessarily prepared for like a debate or anything like that, but more so like, you got to be kind of prepared to like, I don't even want to say defend your position, because but in some ways you do. In some ways you kind of got to be like, all right, what is it? Like, what is this? How do I sort of convey to another individual that I don't like hate with like every fiber of my being, right? Like maybe a friend or something like that, or an acquaintance or whatever. How do I convey to that person that, okay, these are like reasons A through like G why, neoliberalism is like a distinctly capitalist project that is sort of rooted in an individualist sort of ideal, but that sort of individualism doesn't really work, and there's sort of like a bit of collectivism and collectivist sort of mantra in that as well. It's like, why am I talking about that? Because these are things that are particularly toxic, not only to just people generally, but particularly Black folks, right? And there are like scholars who, have talked about that, and this is another thing, like neoliberalism is still pretty potent as like the sort of discourse surrounding neoliberalism is still pretty potent, but there are always points in time where it's like really, really potent. You know what I mean? Where if you're in like academia or you're outside of it or whatever, like it's very clear that these are things that are being discussed, right? Like neoliberalism as a project, as a sort of capitalist sort of project. What's another one? Socialism, right? And what's going on with that? Even more recently, I would say like a democratic sort of socialism, and talking about worker cooperatives and decentralizing, right? Like, and all of these different types of things. Like, these are things that are being discussed now, and I think even more so now because of because of this very clear civil unrest that's sort of going on. So whenever I'm reading text, it's always like, what is the point? Why do I need to know about neoliberalism? And it's because this is one of the things that I am trying to get rid of, right? So I got to know what I'm trying to get rid of, right? Because if I don't know what I'm trying to get rid of, it makes it infinitely harder to get rid of it. It makes it infinitely harder to convince or to work around individuals who are trying to maintain that thing that I'm trying to get rid of. So this is why for me, that's why I'm always saying, like, again, read them books. And it doesn't have to be books, it could be videos, whatever. But it's like, when I'm talking about doing your work, it's like you gotta be aware of certain things. And this is not to say that like I'm gonna be a professor of, political theory and blah 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 blah. No. I'm just trying to be as aware as I possibly can be. And wherever that takes, and hopefully that takes me to a positive place and revolutionary place, and that's sort of linked to like a Black sort of radical tradition, right, of abolition and that sort of thing. So this is why I'm always telling folks, like, like when if I'm on YouTube and then, I'm like seeing folks and they're having certain and they're having certain discussions and things like that, and I'm like, yo, like, again, it's really, really harmful. It's really, really harmful to like come out here, be like, hey, these are my thoughts on this thing, in this community, and not know what you're talking about. I hate that. I hate it. And I don't mean just people in general, but like, like, again, there's certain folks, and it's exhausting right? Because I don't feel like having to talk to certain people. There are people I'm just never gonna talk to again, and that's fine with me because those are decisions that I've made. But it still bothers me when folks are like, having these discussions, these very bad faith sort of like discussions where it's like, oh, okay, let's have a talk, let's have a conversation about this thing, even though I know, I am in no real way going to agree with certain things, and I'm gonna stay rooted in my position and blah 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 blah. I'm like, no. I'm not here for that. I'm not here for that. You know what I mean? Hi. Hello. You know what I mean? So it's stuff like that just like, it bugs me. I don't like it. So that's why it's really important for me to stay informed in different ways, right? Like, I'm not saying like I have to know every single little thing that's happening, but I think it is important to be informed generally. It is important to know folks who are, who have sort of like a line on this particular thing that's happening over here. To know folks who are having who have a line on this particular thing over there. You don't got to know everything. That's very difficult. That's a very difficult thing to do. I don't know everything. That's what I'm reading. My fiance, she's like, I don't know everything. We both don't know everything, but we talk about these things all the time, and this is why community is really important, right? And again, it's like, for me, when I'm reading all this stuff, it's really crucial, again, that I'm like, why am I reading it? What is the point? What am I trying to learn? What am I trying to work towards? So again, this book is for me to have a decent sort of idea, right? Initially, a decent sort of idea of what that is, So for me, it's just rambling, just talking about reading things. Why do you read them? What's the point? And if you decide to read something, what do you like, especially if it's a critical text, right? I think if you just if you're reading fiction and stuff like that, sometimes that isn't a point where you are sort of searching for something and you're trying to get something out of that, whether it's whether you're making a conscious effort to do that or not. But I think it's just what is the point? What do you want to get out of that? What do you hope to get out? What do you hope to take from that? So I was just kind of talking about, here, and just talking about this book that I'm reading. And this is the second sort of book on neoliberalism that I'm sort of going through, and it's just it's pretty good. And that's not to say that that's not to say that I haven't read anything else on the subject, but it's okay, what am I seeking to get from that? And when I finished that first book, I was saying okay, I feel like this is good, but it took me a long time to sort of get through it, and this one is taking me a shorter time because that other book was way more sort of entrenched in a political theory sort of conversation in his sort of academic sort of history, right? And this one is kind of, but not really, because it's more of an introductory sort of text that I think is really good. So, and it's very clear that the author has sort of undergraduate students in mind. But again, it's what are you reading? Why are you reading it? So for me, another text that I'm looking at that I have gone through before, but now I'm really taking my time with it. Another one is on apologetic, Black, Queer, and Feminist Mandate for Radical Movements, and it's by Charlene A. Carruthers, who is a pretty prominent, important Black radical organizer, and that's another thing, right? It's why what are you deciding to read? Why are you deciding to read it? What is sort of the purpose? And again, you don't always have to have that, right? If I'm reading manga, I'm not necessarily looking into a purpose, to read it, outside maybe just having a fun time reading the manga, right? But it's I think that was something for me that I kind of got really sort of hardwired into, and I kind of had to, and it's helpful, but at times it was sort of harmful, right? To sort of think about it as, okay, I'm reading this Morrison novel because I know at some point I'm gonna have to write this like very long paper on one of the novels that I read for this seminar. And okay, as opposed to like I'm reading this Morrison novel for maybe a certain type of catharsis or something like that, right? And others who have read Morrison and really love Morrison, Toni Morrison, right, and love Morrison's works have also talked about that and talked about what their favorites are and this, that, and the third, and those things. So it's like, again, it's really important to, you don't have to do that all the time with everything that you're reading. You really don't. All right, like that's what I'm always saying, like folks out here, like Black folks who are like, really having a hard time right now, right, are well within like right, it's like well within their rights to be like, yo, like I just like, yeah, I want to do things that I want to support in certain ways, in the ways that I can, but I also need to do like these things over here because it can't all be, all the time, 24/7, like literally 24/7. That's like, that's hard. It's hard on like everything. So, yeah. So all right. So like, right, like the other day, I watched a movie with, with friends of mine, and that was great. That was a great way to just kind of like unwind, like not necessarily think about all of the like awful stuff and working towards it and doing all that stuff because it takes energy, it takes a lot of energy, and yeah, so that was great. That was awesome. But again, it's like, what are you reading? Why are you reading it? What do you hope to get from it? And once you're done with it, what do you feel like you've gotten from it? And do you feel like you've learned more? Do you feel like you're sort of better prepared to do the types of to do the type of work that you want to do? So stuff like that is really important to me. Another one that I am going through again as well. Again, another like, better yo, get through that Angela Davis. All right. And of course, like definitely one of the most important scholars, organizers, activists, who are just like, who was just like incredible. And thank you for the support. Thank you so much for the support. Like it means a lot. And I'm always telling people, I'm like, yo, like this is like a global like struggle. Like it's not, like people always like, oh, Korea don't care, South Korea don't care, Japan don't care, this, Italy don't care, like, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it's like you just like some of y'all will just say these things, but have no real idea of what you're talking about. I hate that. It's like, what do you mean? Like, huh? Are you even paying attention? And sometimes it's just like, people have certain circles, and when they have certain circles, like you can kind of tell what they're aware of and what they aren't, right? And like I know people who are in certain circles, they ain't getting nothing. They're getting the same like Black capitalist, neoliberal sort of projects, rooted in like an individualist, yet also like kind of like collectivist mentality. And it's like, okay, you if you keep listening to Diddy, that ain't gonna lead you nowhere. You keep listening to Killer Mike, that ain't gonna lead you nowhere. You know what I mean? Keep listening to Oprah, that ain't gonna lead you nowhere. Like, it's like, you gotta like stop. You know what I mean? So it's just a lot. What like again, the text, what are you reading? Why are you reading it? And I think Davis is a really great place to start. Because Davis has sort of always been, I think, invested in, making sure, and I think most scholars like after her as well, but Davis has always sort of been invested in making sure that, when you read her stuff, you like, it's not difficult. It's not like, particularly difficult to go to read through. But it's also very good. And it's very like, that's not the word I want to use. It's very, cause that's not a good word to use. But there's like a certain kind of like precision and clarity, I would say. That sort of like comes with the ideas that she's presenting. When it comes to sort of like abolition and prison abolition, and police abolition and those things, and this, that, and the third. But this is a great book to go through. You know, I would start with Our Prison's Obsolete. I would say start with that and then move on to Abolition Democracy. But either or is fine. I think if you have some sort of like sense of what it is, I think it's fine to start here. And again, there are always other things to read. I would also say, yes, read texts that are clearly and distinctly about sort of like abolishment. But, again, think about what it is that you're trying to abolish. What are things that you're trying to sort of put in place? Who are you trying to help? And that kind of helps me, at the very least, get a really sort of good idea of what it is that I'm looking to read, why am I looking to read it. Whereas like 7 years ago, I would have just been like, oh, here's this critical text that people say are important. Let me go read that. Which is like, okay, but it's like, I think to me, it's like when you're trying to sort of do particular things and you're trying to like do a particular kind of work, it's really important that you don't sort of like, spend like a lot of time just kind of picking things just to read. It's like, why are you reading it? And you got to ask yourself that. And that's not to say that you can't just, again, like I said, you can't just pick things to read, but why are you reading it? What is the purpose? What are you hoping to get from it? Will it help you do whatever the work it is that you're trying to do? So, again, like, yes, read like Abolition Democracy, read Our Prison's Obsolete, but also read Woman, Race, Class, right? Also read that. Because that's if anything, that is sort of like the like Davis text. There are other texts that are also like the Davis text too, but that one I think is like pretty seminal. It's like that is a text that like most people who sort of are introduced to kind of Davis are start with first. They either start with that, with Women, Race, Class, or they start with Our Prison's Obsolete. They always start with one of the two, and I think that one, like, they're both important for different reasons, but they're like intrinsically sort of linked, right? Like they're very, very sort of linked. And I think if you're reading both of them, it's great. Pick them both up. And yeah, I kind of stopped there in terms of like things that I'm reading, why am I reading them, that kind of thing. So yeah. And another thing that I would say is like when you're reading text, like it's okay to like read certain theorists, right, and scholars obviously, and organizers and who have done certain types of writing, and watch presentations and watch roundtable discussions and watch sort of like conversations that have questions at the end of them from the audience and that sort of thing. But I think it's also really important to be like, okay, is this scholar going to be real? Is that scholar really going to be useful to me or not? So for me, it's like there's a book that I'm sort of waiting on to come in. That is, I guess, sort of like I would say co-authored. I would say like that is authored by Frederick Jameson, who's a really like famous scholar, right? And Zizek, who is also a very famous scholar, and they're both like controversial in different ways. I would probably say that like Zizek is much more controversial than like Jameson, but in certain circles, like philosophy circles and political theory sort of like circles, I would say that Jameson is also like controversial, but most scholars within like political theory circles and philosophy circles, they're all controversial for various reasons, and that's just kind of like the nature of it. But that's something like, and they're sort of writing about like sort of like utopian kind of like vision, like utopian visions, and what those and what it entails, like when thinking about them and sort of doing the work to kind of go towards that. And like I have certain expectations, right? Like the reason why I'm reading that is because I need to see like what other individuals are thinking. Like a lot of what I've been reading lately has been written by women and black women and black trans women, right? So it's like right, so it's like okay, right, or cis black women and trans black women, right? So it's like and queer black women, right? So it's like, what are you know? So it's like, yes, that's important for me to do that because often other scholars will not center them within their works, and that always leads to some hole that right, like some hole that like isn't there because something hasn't been filled or discussed or dealt with in a way. So like I kind of expected that some things are gonna be kind of like it's gonna be a little messy. It's gonna be a little like I'm gonna do a lot of hmms when I'm reading that. I know that because like in the past, like when I've read through like a little bit like a bit of Jameson, like I've always hummed, you know, and there are reasons for that. So it's like that's another thing for me. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm not gonna read like 80 like books, you know, like at the moment in time, like that. But I'm gonna say, okay, these are people that, you know, people, you know, like Moten had mentioned, Fred Moten, who's another very like important scholar, had noted, and it was a talk with Sadia Hartman, and in conversation, and they were sort of talking about this sort of like idea of like the outdoors and what does that sort of mean in relation to you know, white supremacy, black liberation, like a black radical sort of politic, and it was interesting. I think like both of them had really interesting things to say. The questions like from the audience were like okay, but I think they were more so just like trying to sort of get ideas for like whatever sort of paper they were gonna try to write or whatever, because like that's the thing. All right, but right, they just kind of like they weren't necessarily asking questions so much as they were just like making statements. And you know, like Moten sort of like mentioned Jameson in relation to in relation to his discussion of, you know, the sort of like the sort of troubling nature of moving towards like black liberation and what does that entail. So it's like so when I said that, I'm like, okay, that's interesting to me because I want to see what Jameson has to say about that, you know, because I want to see how is it that Jameson is informing Moten in this way, right? So that's stuff that I'm always invested in, right? Like, it's like when you're reading things, also be like, all right, somebody here said this scholar, you know, scholar A said this thing and has referenced scholar B to sort of make a point for them, right? To sort of make a point for themselves, right? To make like, and that to me is really important. I want to know what is informing this sort of idea, and do I even agree with this particular sort of like point that's being raised, and will I agree with whatever it is that informed this point that I may or may not agree with. So like it's stuff like that. It's like a lot of like sort of thought. But I think it's really important to just kind of like give yourself like the space to do that kind of work, because you never sort of want to get to a place where when it comes to thinking, you never want to get to a place where you're like, I definitely know, you know, like about these sort of like general concepts, you know, like you never want to get to a place where like, all right, I got it. I know all I need to know about neoliberalism and worker cooperatives and you know, black feminist thought, you know, and critical race theory. Like, I definitely know what I need to know, you know, about intersectionality, and I'm good. You always want to sort of like keep it sort of moving. You always want to kind of keep it moving. I think that's really important to me. That's why again, like for me, it's like when I see sort of folks who were just kind of like, you know, they just be like chilling. They're like chilling in their thought process, that like in the ways that they sort of view like the world and their social and like and their like immediate social environments, and it's like, you know, like their immediate sort of like social spheres, and it's like, really though, you know, and it bugs me, but you know, again, there are people who I feel like if I put in all that work to sort of like explain it to them, it would be like a waste of my energy, because I know they would not bother to really get it. They'd just be like, all right, I said I listened and I didn't really listen. And so now I'm going to be even more entrenched in my sort of like xenophobic and other phobia and other phobic beliefs, you know, so, and other sort of like bigoted beliefs. So I don't even bother wasting my time with that stuff anymore. Like I know who I can talk to about those things and who will actually listen. And that's something that I've been doing. And that's always great to see. And then I know people who are just like, whatever, you know, and they're not going to learn nothing. Not really. And it is what it is, or at least that's how I feel. But if they do, and they want and they want to change and like think about things in different ways, and then awesome. I'm not saying like I don't want people to learn. I'm saying like I'm not going to be the person to put out that energy for those particular individuals. I'm just not going to do that. That's a decision that I made, right? And that's it. That's it. You know? So yeah. But again, a lot of it is just like, what are you reading? Why are you reading it? What's the point? What are you trying to get from it? And I think that's a big part of sort of that. And not just reading, right? But like, and you know, there's like different ways of reading, right? There's like different ways of reading, obviously. So, right? Because like, I'm not trying to be ableist. So it's like, you know, how are you doing that? And of course, accessibility is really important to that as well. So, you know, always thinking about that. And yeah. You know, so for me, again, that's why I'm always saying read them books, like, cause like I mean that. I really mean that. And of course, reading books is like, you know, it's like a hashtag. It's a loaded. I don't want to say, maybe not loaded. Maybe loaded is not the right word. Because of the connotations of it. But like packed. It's like a packed word, you know, which is sort of like related to like unpacking things, right? Like it's like a hashtag that is packed with things, and you want to unpack those things and figure out like what is that, like what does that hashtag sort of encompass. But you know, that doesn't mean like stop reading manga or stop watching anime or this, that, and the third. But I think, you know, there are people who have like who I've noticed who have said like, yo, like I can't right now. And there's a reason for that, right? Like there's like a very clear reason for that. It's because like it's a very, very critical moment. It's a very critical moment. I think a lot of people realize that, and there are a lot of people who do not realize that. And then there's some people who are kind of like somewhere in the middle, and like that's fine, and they're sort of like in this like this sort of like liminal kind of space, I guess, you know. You know, so it's like, you know, yeah, you know, where it's fine, and I get it, and I do, you know. I think individuals who have been so like sort of affected in that way, is because, again, more than anything, they realize like this is a critical moment, and that work does need to be done, and that we have to do that, and that people got to do that work, right? So yeah, got to do the work, you know, in the ways that you can, and you know, and also just like, you know, let me know if there are like texts that you want to sort of know about. Another thing that I'm also really sort of like looking into right now is thinking, let me pull up the article actually, but ideas of like sort of like carceral ideas of, right, like capitalism, carceral ideas of feminism, carceral ideas of allyship and that sort of thing, right? Like, and when I say carceral, I mean like in relation to the prison industrial complex, and police states and all, and this, that, and the third. So there's an article and a scholar who's done some really sort of great writing on that. Let me look let me look her up. I had this in like my downloads folder. That's kind of find that. Let me pop that up. But it's basically like, and there are other scholars who have worked on this as well. Like there are quite a few, like right, like not just like scholars who are within like like scholars from different fields. But it's just like talking about the ways, like right, like the ways in which we talk about sort of like feminism in relation to prisons, right, in terms of punishment, in terms of imprisonment, and why those sorts of ideas are related to a very capitalist and carceral capitalist, right? A particularly carceral capitalist idea of feminism and sort of like justice and that sort of thing, and why that's an issue. And again, this is not stuff that like I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not like, oh, here you go. It's like these are things that people have been writing about for years, right? And this is stuff that I'm really invested in because there are people that I want to support, right? Myself included. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's important to sort of think those things through and to sort of like constantly be thinking about institutions and ways of thought and why one sort of like ideological sort of like path may not be the best route to take towards liberation, right? Because of its relationship to an ideological or well to in sort of like political ideology that is or political project that is enmeshed in like exploitation and oppression. You know what I mean? It's like those are things you have to think about. And to me, again, it always comes back to like I always see people who just they want to think they know everything. They want to be so rooted in their like oppressive sort of like ways of thinking, in their bigoted ways of thinking, and it's like it's just like damn, like y'all don't even try to learn. Some of y'all will be out here talking about nah, I don't really pay attention. I don't really read that stuff. I'm like, yo, that to me is so. It makes me so sad. You know what I mean? Like it just fills me like a very particular sort of like sadness, and kind of like despair. Really, might be the word, because it's like, yo, y'all not even trying. Come on, you know? Y'all just be like rooted in those terrible ideas, and that's what bugs me. You know, it's like at once I don't want to talk to these folks. I really don't, because like those particular folks do not want to change. I'm not wasting energy on them. At the same time, I'm like, y'all directly, well, not even directly, but directly and indirectly, you know, support these systems that need to go. So, come on, you know? So, you know, that's why, again, it's really important to sort of like look into that stuff and to constantly sort of be pushing forward. And that's why, like I was saying, like on Twitter, that this stuff is really important, right? Like it's really important to, you know, like academia and like and scholarship, like, right? Like scholarship is important. It's really it's very crucial, because a lot of like folks who are out here who are sort of like disseminating particular ideas and ways of thought are not like, you know, talking out their butt, right? Like there's like scholarship behind that. There's, you know, studies behind that, conversation, discourse behind that, and yeah, you know, and it's like, yes, that stuff is important, but like I said on Twitter, like academia is like a bit of a mess. It's a bit of a mess. We know this, all right. Whether you were in academia and chose to leave, or you aren't in academia but you know a lot about it and that sort of thing, right? Like you sort of like related to academia by proxy, and that right. So like it's like, you know, or not by proxy, but like tangentially, right? So like we know that, and again, like there are scholars who are sort of talking about what is it that, you know, how do we fix that? Is the academy as it is sort of necessary? And I think a lot of folks would say like no. Um, but a lot of folks sort of like for reform in certain ways, and there are folks who are just like, no, 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 we got it. We just no, this ain't it. This ain't it. And that's why you have like independent scholars who are not related to any one sort of like institution, academic institution, but like do their stuff not on their own, but in a relative sense, yeah, right, like they do, because other scholars like who are related to institutions have a huge sort of like backing, and they have like access to literary journals via their institutional connections, right? So all these things are kind of like things that you have to think about, and it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I think the last thing that I'll say is, this is a critical moment, because I think people are some people, right, are, and this is two things, right? Some people are like aware that this murder, right, like the murder of George Floyd, and the murder of Breonna Taylor, and the murder of, right, and all these other folks who've been murdered, right, are, right, the consistent murder of Black trans folks, right, all of this is really crucial, because it's not just these horrific actions that are, right, occurring in a vacuum. It's all sort of interconnected. And once you really begin, if you haven't already, once you sort of begin to sort of realize that, then it's like, then the sort of enormity of it all, I think for some people really starts to sink in, and really starts to be like, and you're just like, yo, and you just like, I gotta get to work. Because, right, again, it's not just as murder. It's like, what is a particular system that allows for that, for those murders to occur, and what are those systems related to, connected to, and what are the other systems that work in a sort of synergetic sort of way, right, to support, to sort of support one another. Maybe like, I would say synergetic, but not in like a positive sort of sense, right? Not in a sort of positive sense, but in a very like deeply capitalist, oppressive, exploitative, which is kind of redundant because capitalism is exploitative and oppressive, in those systems, So once you kind of have this sort of idea, like, yo, this thing is it's on like a scale that isn't even just related to like, it's so absurdly encompassing that there are moments where you're just like, where like you literally feel like you're like, yo, like, like just this weight, and the weight is not only on your chest, but it's like on your entire body. So you're like, I gotta get this weight off as quickly as I possibly can. And this is the thing, and this is why there are people who feel like they have been sort of galvanized into action. And this is not the way that we would like to have been galvanized into action, but it is what it is. Unfortunately, because, and I say it is what it is, but like, it's not, right? Because we want to change things. So I'm gonna sort of retract that. But like, there's so many different things that people can do, and that I want people to continue doing. And, right, like, donate if you can, help out if you can, in different ways, physically, do your research, right? Do your due diligence. Think about what it is that you want for your future, for the next generation, for the youth, for your elders who are still here and who are still alive and kicking and moving, and living. So what do you want for all those folks? For me, it's like liberation. That's what I want. Period. Period. All right. So always think about these things. Do your work. And I think I'm gonna stop here because it's 3:23. I gotta get something to drink. But again, it's just like, oh, it always comes back to this. What are you doing? How are you doing it? Why are you doing it? And those are questions that I think are really important and help me a lot. And yeah. But also, make sure you get your rest, because rest is important. Self-care is important. Shout out to all the folks that, contacted me, DMs and all that, looked out. And yeah. All right. That self-care is really important. It really is. It really is. Because like, without it, I think there's a sort of like impossibility that, in terms of like your ways of thinking, that sort of creeps in, where you're just like, oh man, I can't do this stuff. Like, I don't have the energy, I don't have the strength, I don't have the tenacity, whatever. And self-care is really important to sort of like maintaining that, maintaining that energy, maintaining that perseverance and all of that, So take care of yourselves. All right, so I'm gonna get out of here. That was Ramblings 8, Doing Your Work Part 3. I'm gonna get back to streaming probably. I have a webinar tomorrow. I have a webinar that's coming up in like 30 minutes. But yeah, do the work. All right, do the work, and I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna probably get back to streaming at on Saturday. That's sort of the goal. The goal is Saturday. All right. So let me get out of here. Thank y'all for coming through. All right. Shout out to everybody in the chat that came through. Let's see. Shout out to Tails, Jackson, Level and Eddie, for coming through. All y'all dope. Support y'all. Love y'all. All right. And I'm gonna go because I got things to do. All right. And I'll be back to streaming like manga on Saturday. All right. I'll be back to that. All right. You already know what it is. Yes. Right. Black lives, all black lives, not just black messes, het black men. All right. All y'all matter. We all matter. So let's go. Let's get to it. All right. I'm going to get out of here. Thank y'all for coming through. The Black Manga Critic. And I'm out.